Hi, welcome to today's video. My name's Paul. So this week is some soft pastel landscape painting. But before I get into the soft pastels, I just wanted to show you a sort of warm-up exercise that I do, which is basically just sketching with charcoal. With this sort of exercise, I don't have any big goals. I'm not trying to produce a finished charcoal drawing. It's just to sort of loosen up. When I was younger, I heard about people saying how good and how important it was to warm up before diving into painting or drawing. And at the time I used to think it sounds a bit silly. I can understand if you're going for a run or if you're doing some sort of physical exercise, warming up would be a good idea. But when you're doing painting and drawing, is it really necessary? Or is it just a sort of gimmick? But I have found that it does help. It's helped me anyway. So I would definitely recommend it as something worth trying. So like I say, with me doing lots of landscapes, I usually just get a cheap sketchbook and a piece of charcoal and just do a sort of a landscape. Again, no references or anything, just having fun, putting down some lines and seeing what happens. There's no goals for this. I'm not trying to create a great piece of art. It's just a sketch in a sketchbook. But like I say, it really has helped me when it comes to more finished paintings. As for the actual soft pastel landscape painting, in terms of the materials, I'm using mainly Schmincke soft pastels, and you can see a few of them in the box on the left of the screen. I usually just break them into smaller pieces. The paper is by Stratford, I think that's the name of the company, and they market it as charcoal paper. You can see as I'm putting down this blue pastel, it has that sort of textured surface. If it's designed for charcoal, my way of thinking is that it'll work for any sort of dry medium as well, to some extent. This is not a coated paper, so it doesn't have a very porous surface. Therefore, in terms of putting on soft pastels, you can only really get 2, if you're lucky, maybe 3 layers of color. So with the sky, I put down some blue and then just smudge it, try and get some of the soft pastel dust into the sort of troughs in between the peaks of the paper. As I said, it has this textured surface, and I just want to get a bit of blue into those other areas. If I don't, it'll end up looking a bit pixelated, if you like. The sky would end up looking a bit pixelated. So anyway, that's just why I do the smudging with the tissue paper. Everything else after that in the sky is just building up layers. In terms of sort of the goals for this painting, I want it to be an Impressionist painting. So in the sort of early style of Impressionism. So in other words, if you just sort of caught a glimpse of a landscape kind of thing. So therefore, I'm not doing lots of details. There'll be implied details, but I'm not going in for a very accurate, detailed landscape. And again, as with the sketch, there's no reference material. It's all just coming out of my head. So technically you can say that the landscape doesn't exist in real life. But the finished landscape, certainly in Ireland, there's probably 1 million landscapes that are, if not identical, very similar to the one that I'll end up with. So it is coming out of my head, but it's based on memory and things like this. The main sort of influences, if you like I say, it's Impressionist, so especially early Impressionism. Another influence on this painting that I'm doing is Van Gogh's, some of his landscape paintings. In particular, the way he used the brush strokes to create a feeling of vegetation and trees and things. It's something that I really admire in his paintings, and therefore it's an influence on this painting. The third sort of influence then is something that I talked about a few videos ago, and that's fauvism. So in that video I said I was probably going to have a go at doing a fauvist landscape, or at least a landscape that was sort of inspired by fauvism. And this is the landscape. The influence, if you like, is to do with colours. So you can see I've already put down sort of yellows and oranges, and then I'm putting down sort of purple hedgerows. And that contrast then between the purple and the orange, that's part of the influence from fauvism, where they used complementary colours beside each other. So what I mean by complementary colours is, if you imagine the colour wheel, start off with your three primary colours, the red, blue and yellow, and then if you mix those you get the secondary colours. So the red and yellow will give you orange, red and blue will give you purple. They're kind of opposite each other, and therefore they're complementary colours. And a lot of non-fauvist art, I suppose, people might try to avoid using complementary colours beside each other, because they can sort of clash and conflict with each other. I can especially notice that with red and green, I think. But I decided to use the purple and the orange mainly. So there's not a huge influence from fauvism, but there is some in there. I did learn something from looking at their art. One of the things that's definitely not fauvism is they tended to do very flat landscapes, not using perspective, whereas mine, I am trying to use perspective, linear perspective, to create a feeling of depth. And by that I just mean, for example, if you think of it in terms of the middle ground and the foreground, in the foreground there's a lot more detail. You can see blades of grass and things growing up, whereas the middle ground you can't see those small details. So that sort of creates that feeling of the landscape receding from us, a feeling of depth. In terms of things like middle ground and foreground, maybe one way to think, how I think about painting is, it's like building a house. We start off with a foundation, and in my case the foundation is the sky and the horizon line. You might think, because it's a landscape, why would you consider the sky to be the foundation? Surely the land should be the main thing. But I think, it's just my opinion, but I think that the sky really determines the overall feeling of a landscape. What season are you trying to do? Is it a rainy day, a snowy day? You get that sort of grey sky. Is it a midsummer day with bright blue sky and no clouds? Something like I have, where it's a bit of blue showing through, but there's also a lot of clouds. It really sets the mood for the whole painting, I think. The horizon line, I also try and make that kind of a feature of the painting. So it's important for me, that division between the land and the sky. So that's why I spend a bit more time maybe doing those two parts of the painting initially. Once I've got that done, then I can start working on middle ground and foreground. The foreground, like I say, is lots of implied detail, try and suggest something that's close to us, and then the middle ground is really that connector between the foreground detail and that horizon line. And for me, the job of the middle ground then is using something like linear perspective just to give a feeling of maybe some depth in the painting. And you can see that with the hedgerows, the purple hedgerows that I put in. So this is then scan of the final painting, as I say, Impressionist in style, I think. Really not going for lots of little details, but just suggesting those details. And using colors, that maybe a color scheme that isn't a usual color scheme. I'm not trying to represent a realistic landscape. I'm trying to use some of those ideas from Fauvism. Well, if you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching. Hopefully it was a bit rambly, but maybe something in there is of some use to somebody. So again, thank you for watching, and hopefully see you in the next video.